That's CPD Show. My name is Chris and I'll be your host for today. And today I'm joined on the island by Mark Steele. Mark is the general manager of Audacious Church, a multi-site church with 7 locations in Manchester, Chester, Sheffield, Cardiff and Geneva. Mark is also a head coach for AOG's Ministers in Training program for their cohort 25. And Mark is married to Michelle. They have 2 children, Anna and Sam. Mark, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Oh, hey, it's absolute pleasure to be here with you, Chris.
Fantastic.
Well, I'm on desert island, though.
That's important to note that it's not actually a desert island. This
Okay.
is the big thing, because other podcasts might have desert islands that they go to. We don't go to a desert island. We go to a desert island, which of course is much more, I would say, is a lot better. Why would you go to a desert island when you could go to a desert island, is what I say. So, and that's actually what we're going to talk about today. We've got 3 resources that we're going to be going through. But before we do that, I'd love to hear what's the dessert that you've brought with you to this desert island? What's your favorite dessert?
Just checking, is this island that we are sitting on made of dessert, or is this the only food that I can eat on this island?
That has not been confirmed, but
Okay.
my guess would be that it is a nice island where all you eat is dessert.
Brilliant. I'm looking forward to getting really chunky.
Maybe it is a kind of complete. I'm kind of thinking of there's a Simpsons episode where Homer is imagining that he can eat everything, and so he starts eating everything on this thing. So I think it's a bit like that. The lampposts are made of chocolate, and the hills are made of something else, and the clouds are pavlova or something. So
Brilliant.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Okay, cool. Well, so on this island made out of purely sweet products, I would have to put my wife's Biscoff and ginger cheesecake. It's probably not, if I'm honest. It's unbelievably good tasting. But the thing is, it just invokes so many happy memories, because it is the dessert that she pulls out every time we have people around. So what it does for me is, yes, it fills me up, but it also just reminds me of brilliant times, great people, fun memories. So yeah, that's why I would choose that, and not something fancy from a 5-star resort.
Okay. Well, that's a great choice. I mean, firstly, Biscoff is a really good option. So the ginger, is that ginger biscuits? Is that actual ginger itself? Stem ginger. How is that?
Oh, that is a great question. Because she's made it for so many years, she does little evolutions every so often. And originally it started as a ginger snap base with a lemon sort of cheesecake topping, which is just made out of soft cheese and sugar and goes in the fridge. It's amazing. But every so often she zhuzhes it up with different things. So she has put stem ginger in the base, and now it's a Biscoff and ginger snap with the syrup from the stem ginger jar in the base. That is when it hits a next level, and then slight hint of ginger in the topping, and then some candied stem ginger on top if it's a really fancy guest.
That is very, very good. I mean, I do like that, because obviously Biscoff is very sweet.
Yes.
And then ginger obviously provides that counterbalance. And I always like that in a dessert. You don't want it so, sickly sweet that you can't get through it.
Truth.
And so having something just to sort of, pare that sweetness back a little bit, I think is a very, very good option. So yes, that sounds like a very good dessert. I like that. Biscoff and ginger cheesecake. I must have that when I come around to the Steele household, and make sure that.
That's all you'll get.
Yeah, I made it very clear that this is all I eat is dessert now, I think. So I think that's it. So okay, no, that sounds like a great dessert, and a welcome addition to the island. Shall we move on to your first resource? We're going to talk about 3 today, but we're going to start with your first resource. What's the first one that you've got?
The first one I've got is a book called How People Grow by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. It is just a brilliant book. It's one of those books, I don't know if you have them, but it's a returner. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings. It's epic and it's big and it's multifaceted and there's loads going on. And you're not against watching it every couple of years. This is a book that I go back to.
Well, I mean, I'm going to have to sort of leave Lord of the Rings to one side because I could talk about it for hours. And I'm actually going through the book of it at the moment, but we're going to focus on How People Grow by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. And we've had a Cloud and Townsend book on before, which I think we have Boundaries. Eliana White brought that one.
Great.
So talk to me about how people grow. Uh, what's the sort of, I mean, obviously the premise is about how people grow, but
Yeah.
what sort of things do they dive into? What are some things that they sort of bring out in the book?
Yeah, it's, as you would expect, it is a mix between theology and psychology. And what they really do is, I think, overarching, they debunk quite a few myths in this sort of traditional Christian viewpoint of how discipleship happens and how a person should grow. I do think it's probably a bit of a forerunner that has led in further into things like emotionally healthy leadership and discipleship. There's definitely themes that are in there, but it's very, very based. There's quite a lot of theology in it. There's quite a lot of Bible reference in it. Like, it answers questions like, yeah, well, I've prayed and I'll just grow because I've prayed. That kind of thing. Yes, that's true. We believe that prayer can do all things, and a person's life can be transformed in an instant by the power of the Holy Spirit. But I'm not saying that's not possible. I 100% believe that and live by that. But also the sort of more gradual processes of growing day by day, inch by inch, that kind of thing is really reflected, and the correct conditions and environment to put yourself into to make sure that you can grow day by day, inch by inch, in the best way.
So I'd love to touch on that topic, which is what is the best environment according to Cloud and Townsend? What's the best environment for growth that's an individual can have?
Well, ultimately, what they're saying is, you need relationship to grow, but it's got to be the right kind of relationship. It's going to be a relationship or a group or a support network, which is an environment that is where you feel you can be honest, which is a journey to become more honest and more vulnerable. And you feel that that's reciprocated, and therefore it creates a safe environment to unearth, what's really going on in you, and then really apply scripture to yourself, really apply the reflections that you're going through with Jesus, and have that help by a person or a group of people. So immediately you can go, oh, you need a counselor. Counseling is part of the solution. But so is having a good set of mates. They're equally as important. It's like our environment. It needs everything. It needs carbon, it needs dioxide, it needs oxygen. Without one, it doesn't work. So it goes through all of those kind of things.
No, that's really interesting. I think to me, immediately speaks to how do we run small groups as churches, and for ministers listening to this, I think it's always one of the great battles of church life, is figuring out how do you do groups and how does that work well. And I think there's one of the things I've sort of known is that how groups work is that they tend not to particularly well sometimes. So do you think that this book speaks to that? And if so, in what sort of ways would it help would it help maybe a minister rethink about how they think about groups, or how does it speak into that?
Yeah, I think it confirms the importance of groups, but it also says about the group must be the right group. So it's one thing having a small group that all go cycling, but if there's never any vulnerability, the small group will never perform growth. Like, people may not grow, they may feel more connected, which is great, and they may become more healthy physically. But if there's not a culture in there of openness, if it's just all lads banter, yes, you are, it's more like that sustaining you rather than growing you. So it doesn't delve specifically into how to create a great group, but the principles that you learn in it about what a person needs holistically. You can definitely look at a group and you might go, well, that's going to grow X area of a person's life, but probably not Y. So a person might need 3 or 4 different groups, because
Yeah.
if you were, because we are body, mind, soul, spirit. If you're just growing in your spirit, but you have a horrendous eating thing because the only groups you go to are the restaurant-based groups, um, and desert islands made out of sweets, that's not healthy. Do you know what I mean? So it does focus on growing holistically as a person in all areas of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that I've been thinking about recently is that, especially with groups, and like you said, that vulnerability factor,
Mm.
and you said it's, it takes time to build. I remember seeing a study just recently that said that to build sort of core friendships takes 200 hours
Yeah.
of time. So, yeah, how does that, how do you get groups or maybe just friendships to and in a church context as well?
Yeah.
People come from other places and they, in a growing church, people are joining the church. How do you help journey to that point where they can be vulnerable with other people?
I mean, that's an incredible start, right? So imagine a life group is an hour of a week. That's 4 years before you get to become vulnerable, assuming somebody has a starter for 10 and can go there. There's no barriers and no limits. You've got people. So that's quite an incredible thing. So I think that also tips its hat to it. We can't simply do discipleship alone by having a small group system. It's part of a menu of growth that will help. I forgot the other part of the question and was just listening to that.
No. That's absolutely fine. I think that this book seems like it's going to be, it's kind of rewiring how we think about not just groups, but just discipleship in general. Is
Yeah.
there any other sort of nuggets of gold that you picked out from the book that you'd want to share?
Well, I think this is the thing, because there's scripture in it. I I use it every couple of years as a devotional book because it really will speak to you about you if you allow it to. So the last time I read it, I was really impacted about perfectionism, which was an individual application for me,
Yeah.
and that started me on a little journey of, well, how does that affect me, and what do I need to lighten up about, or what do I need to let go of, or how does that mean I'm treating the volunteers around me, or the staff that I've got working for me, or my wife and my kids. So I wouldn't ever like to put one big principle, because I've found it really good. Not as the core devotional of my life, like you might be reading 365 days through the Bible with Nicky Gumbel or John Stott. Not as that, but like a supplementary thing of going, okay, I'm going to read 5 pages of this and see what God's saying. That, for me, it's a book like that. It's not just, there's a workbook you can buy with it and work through, but it's not solely just like like an academic textbook. It's not as light as like a Philip Yancey or John Ortberg book, which can be very devotional, but there's enough stuff in there that you can read it and let God speak to you personally. And that's why I would go back to it again and again.
Great. Okay. Well, that's How People Grow by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. Should we move on to your second resource? What's the second one that you brought today?
Yeah, I absolutely love the High Performance Podcast by Jake Humphrey. So he's the guy who used to present on BT Sport, and it's just an excellent podcast.
Okay, so talk to me about this podcast. I've heard of Jake Humphreys because
Yeah,
he did the Formula One and BT Sport and
yeah.
those kind of things. What's the podcast about? What sort of things do they talk about? Give me a bit of a overview.
Cool. So what they do is basically they ask it's a quest. It's part of a movement, I would say. Now they've got books out and other merchandise, I've been to the live show, and really what it is about opening each individual's eyes to perform to the highest standard they possibly can. And for me, that resonates with one of my sort of core beliefs, which is I'm on a journey to be the best me that I can be. And the only person who knows the best me that I can be is actually God and Jesus. Like, they know the ultimate person I could be, because they know everything they've packed inside me. And that's unlocked day by day, hopefully. And so when I listen to this podcast, it does resonate with that part of me that says, "Oh, come on, how can I find what's inside me?" So the stuff about purpose, the stuff about passion, the stuff about enthusiasm. But really, they ask this a multitude of guests the same questions every time. So they ask, "What is your definition of high performance?" And what are your 3 non-negotiables? So what sort of things in life could you not do without? And they ask a multitude of different guests. So one of the latest ones is with Paul Gascoigne. They do, because of his connections in sport, there is a lot of sport people, but he's also quite a highly gifted entrepreneur. So there's loads of business people on there as well. So what I really love about it is you get, like, I am drawn to the football ones and I'm drawn to the golf ones, but one of the best ones out there is an interview with Paul McGinley, who led Europe to beat USA in the Ryder Cup. And the insights that he shares on how to build a team are absolutely outstanding. There's one by the Brentford director of football. Again, it's about how to form a team that performs incredibly well. And it's just some of the stuff that come out. If you are in any way at all building a team, which I would hope most pastors are doing, because you can't lead a church on your own. It's just so insightful, and it's stuff from the world, and there's some bunkers. There's some language on there, I'm not going to lie, every so often, because you can't censor every guest. There's interviews with Tyson Fury, which were absolutely enlightening. You just get so much left, right. It's really helpful to be inspired and challenged by so many different worldviews and experiences. It's so good. It's so colourful.
Yeah, I certainly, I mean, I've not listened to this podcast, but it certainly resonates in terms of, I certainly really enjoy watching sports documentaries a lot of the time, because that's, like you said, that high performance mindset, I think is something which I find very, very fascinating. So me and my wife enjoy watching ones around tennis for some reason. I only ever watched tennis at Wimbledon. But for some reason, we enjoyed watching a tennis documentary, but just to get inside the mindset of elite sports people, and just seeing how they tick and what it's needed to kind of go to push yourself to be the very best. I find that really quite inspiring. I don't quite know why. And then I enjoy how I think it probably does speak to that cross-discipline learning, which I think is really important. So we often think about, we might read business books, but actually you could read a book about sport and that could be developmental to you. So like this, an interview with a famous sportsman could well unlock something in your church. So just speak to that for me. How do you find that, being able to sort of translate things, and maybe not just from the business world, like that happens quite a lot within church circles, but also into maybe areas like sport or other areas, how you find that, how you utilize those other disciplines to inform your church life and your church practice, your ministry?
I think that's a really, really good question. I have often found myself listening to it, and there might have been a line or a concept that people have delivered, and I've went, "Oh, gee, I think that could really work for us in this area." Or, "Oh, wow, how could the pastoral team take on board how the Octopus group have built something, or it's because I don't think that, well, I guess one of my core beliefs is in the power of coaching, that if there's a good coach, it can raise the performance level of a team. And I think if you're dealing with any team, it can be a worship team, it can be a youth leaders team, it can be a pastoral team, it can be a staff team, it can be a team of highly functioning volunteers. Ultimately, they all need vision, they all need strategy, and they all need care. And I think that, and they all need feeding. And yes, you are a spiritual leader, but I think the church can be helpful if you can put a principle in place in church that shows a team growing or shows success in changing an environment or doing some change management. I think that a teacher who is serving as, I don't know, the head host, if they can take that principle and take it back to their school, you're helping them be better in their workplace. So for me, I've got no problem taking things. I just had one really it stuck with me. I can't remember who said it, but it was just this time, we all need to have same page moments more often. And I was like, wow. And since then I've absolutely noticed that even though there are team members that love each other, care for each other, we share the same vision, often just life can make them not be on the same page anymore. And what we need to do at micro level, I'm talking about week to week in your team meetings, checking in that we're all on the same page and we're still traveling in the same direction. And then macro level, I don't know about issues like, well, the world's gone bonkers, hasn't it? There's so many issues now, but it would be wrong of us to imagine that every single person, if we just take divorce, that every single person on your team has got the exact same perspective, could say the same thing about divorce. Probably not. So when are you going to create a same page moment to find out where everybody's at, tell them where we should be, or group form collaboratively where we should be, and then plan how to get there? So I think that for me just stuck, and it's definitely become part of my language. It's definitely part of what we do as in my staff team, is create these moments of same page.
No, absolutely. I think the idea of same page moments is something that any minister could take and put into practice tomorrow. Are we on the same page? Let's just go through that. Just think about that from like you said, the big macro stuff, vision, mission, but through to just ministry philosophy a little bit. How do we go about this, and how do we think about these things? What are some principles that we work towards? And I think that that's a fascinating concept, and I'm sure that podcast has got loads of different nuggets like that, those kind of wisdom principles, those thoughts. So no, great, brilliant. So that's the High Performance Podcast. Should we move on to your final resource? What's the final one you brought with you?
Yeah, the final one is more a concept than an actual resource, but it's definitely the concept of having any structured learning in your life on a consistent basis is going to make you a better person, without a doubt. So, for example, last year, I challenged myself by going through the foundation level 1 in coaching through Sam Chan's leadership network. And it was just amazing. It helped me become a better dad, a better husband, a better line manager, a better friend, just by some of the techniques that it taught me. And I found the fact that, number one, I'd paid for it. Number two, there was deadlines. And number three, there was accountability, because you had to check in all the time and submit reflections and work pieces. I found that really helpful, because there's one thing having a book or a podcast, but the book doesn't shout at you. The book doesn't it doesn't peer pressure you into doing the thing that is right, which is learning. It doesn't force you to reflect. You can just read a book or listen to it, but it doesn't force you to reflect, which is what an exam or a one-to-one coaching session or a reflection exercise essentially gets you to do, which is you have taken stuff in. Now you are going to process it and apply it. So I think anything like that you can do is beneficial in every format of life.
No, that's absolutely great. And I mean, I'm also a fan of that. I'm currently doing a master's degree, and before that, I did a couple of project management qualifications. So I think that putting yourself through that kind of that thing where you've got to test yourself a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You're testing your skills, you're testing your learning. I think I mean, for me going through the masters, and I'm only in my first year of doing it, but how it sharpens and trains your thinking is really fascinating, because you can't really think the same afterwards, because your thinking has been so sharpened. And so even for me in the masters, you can't just say something. You have to say something and back it up. So you have to back it up with references and with quotes, and so that process really gets you into, and that makes you a better thinker, because now I'm not just going, oh, this is just my opinion. You get to that point, but you have to work through all of that structuredness of it. So and that's been so helpful for me. So talk to me about what are some of the things you learned. I know that you're doing a qualification at the moment, so talk me through what you're doing and what you're learning in your structured learning process at the moment.
So right now I'm doing a level 5 CIPD qualification in people management, which is a HR based degree. And it let me just probably put this out there for anybody who's listening. You can access many courses like that for next to nothing through the apprenticeship scheme. Now you might think, well, apprenticeship, isn't that just for 16, 17, 18-year-olds coming out of school? No, most organizations pay a apprenticeship levy if they're a big company. So like Marks and Spencer's, Tesco, etc. There are other supermarkets out there, but big names. But every smaller company, 95% of it can be funded by the government. So you may only pay 5% of the course fees for a workplace apprentice. And if you are a person in full-time employment, that could be you. So you could do an apprenticeship in project management. You could do an apprenticeship in HR, apprenticeship in organizational leadership. All of that kind of stuff is out there. You've just got to be able to access it. So if you're employed, or you are a minister with a staff team, it's there for you to access. You just have to find the right provider. So what am I learning through this? I'm definitely learning lots about people and organization and how to build organizations and how to think about. So one term that I'd never heard of, but it's quite there's a psychological contract between an employee and the employer. And you might love your job, like actually what you do with your hands, but if you have an upset with the employer, it can break the psychological contract. And the only thing at that point in holding you there is because you love what you do with your hands. But if the employer breaks your heart, then all it takes is you to not like what you're doing with your hands anymore, and you're off. And I found that a really interesting concept, just to think about for volunteers. Think about it in the life of church, how that affects people. So although it was talking about, staff and staffing, I really think that that's applicable to every sphere of church life. Why would a person leave your church? Is it because somehow the psychological contract between the church and them has been broken? And what was it that broke it? We can't just say, oh, forgive. We can and say, don't get offended, because that is one of the biggest things in church that stops people going to church, is because of offense. That's a spiritual principle. But what happened? What could be done to have not made that happen? How can we what can we pour into people? that puts more into the bank, do you know what I mean, than yeah, I found it really interesting.
Yeah, what sort of things break that psychological contract? Is it is it not keeping promises? Is it what those
Loads of
things?
things. That is a great example you gave there. Not broken promises. So saying X and not delivering is massive. Promising something. If you keep somebody in good communication in between that process, there's a lot of grace involved. But if it was promise X by whatever time and it doesn't happen, that it's done. You've broken that psychological contract that was in place. What other kind of things? Like unmet expectations, unfairness or perceived. It only has to be perceived unfairness, which needs unpacking, usually by communication. Yeah, those probably. Disappointment in an employment context of not getting a promotion, not feeling that they've been developed, that kind of thing. But I think that exists in church life, in many places. So it's really got me thinking about all of that kind of aspect of people management, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes in church life it can be taken a little bit for granted, can't it? Sometimes I think we sometimes think, we're all, we're all believers, so let's forgive, and which is of course a very good, very necessary part of it. But it can sometimes that can overlook those kind of things, can't they? So it's being aware and then thinking, okay, how could we be more intentional about things? Because a lot of the times, broken promises, especially in a church context, aren't always, obviously sometimes, but not always. They're not intentional. They're through a either they were things were unspoken, or it was an accident and things like that, and oftentimes it's not malice, it's sort of negligence, as it were, in the nicest sort of way. You didn't realize that it was happening, and those kind of things happen. So no, fantastic. And that was all through doing some structured learning in HR, and so it's amazing what kind of bits of wisdom that you may not get from reading a book. And there's certainly one of those things where with CPD, we've put a thing of, if you do a course, you can obviously earn points for that. Obviously you get it for books as well, and trying to, as much as possible, include this reflection piece. How has that impacted you? How has that impacted your ministry? So trying to include that, and I think there's more we can do with CPD on that, and I'd love to see how how it develops in the future. But certainly that reflection piece, as you said, seems really crucial to every part of development.
Oh, without a doubt, I think, and you can do reflections in many different ways. If you're not a writer, simply talking through what you've just learned is really helpful. So the principles that I've really learned from the podcast, the High Performing podcast, is simply asking the same three questions of something new, be it a guest or a chapter you've read or a podcast you've listened to. Simply asking the same three questions and answering them either verbally to somebody or writing down if you're a journaler, or it is so helpful because it forces you to see what is now in your mind. And if you can't answer the same three questions, which you can invent on your own, then nothing's actually went in. You've spent time leafing through a book, not reading and learning. You've spent time with your AirPods in, listening, but not hearing, but not really listening.
Yeah.
So I think I would just find three questions that would work for you and stimulate your thinking. They could be as simple as, what did I think of that? How can I apply it in my family life? And how could I apply it in my team?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And at the end of the day, if the answer is, I'm not sure, let me get back to you and I'll have to read it again, your action is read it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if the action is speak to my wife about this, plan something in the next team meeting, then you're onto a winner. And just the constant asking of those same questions, you'd be surprised at the power of consistency.
Brilliant. Well, that's structured learning, and three great resources there. So that's How People Grow by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. There's the High Performance Podcast, and structured learning, especially that sort of embraces reflection. And obviously, all of those three things are best done with a Biscoff and ginger cheesecake, I think.
Oh,
So
yes.
So yes, get a Biscoff and ginger cheesecake, and maybe listen to a podcast or read a book, or start undertaking a course. I think that sounds like a great idea, and check out ways that you can look at the apprenticeship program as well. That's great. So brilliant, Mark. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed talking through your three favorite resources. Yeah, thank you so much.
No worries. Absolute pleasure to be with you.